Welcome back to another video. This demo video is going to cover how to use oil paints to paint popcorn. So I'm going to give some step-by-step instructions on how to match the color and how to get a realistic look for your popcorn painting. The materials you're going to need are a pencil, 11 by 14 inch canvas, or if you don't have a canvas panel, you can use a chipboard that is cut down to 11 by 14. You're going to need oil painting supplies such as brushes, paints, palette knife, solvent, and a rag. And you're going to need some popcorn. The goals of this project are to learn how to paint popcorn by simplifying shapes, mix colors for an accurate match, and understand the subtleties of neutral colors. So I wanted to show my palette setup here and the colors I'll be using for this painting. As you can see, I'm placing the colors near the edge of the palette. This is because as I mix colors, I will be able to use the center area for my color mixtures. The main colors that I used were a warm yellow, a cool yellow, white, and dioxazine purple. Now I did put some black on my palette. I didn't end up using it at all. So you don't need black. The purple was sufficient with getting my darker colors. Because yellow and purple are complementary colors. So when you mix them together, you get a neutral. But there were certain areas of the painting, such as cast shadows and the background, that were a bit cooler, and I really wanted the warm tones of the popcorn to pop properly. So the purple was a perfect cool color for me to use in this painting. And as you can see, I already started mixing some color underneath that white and yellow. I mixed a cream color, but I just wanted to show you how I'm using the palette knife to mix my colors quickly and efficiently. So I'm just kind of getting a range of this like cream color to work with, because I know I'll probably be using that, and also mixing a darker neutral with the warm yellow and the cool purple color. So I got a couple neutral tones for that. Here is the basically what I'm looking at, the setup. Now keep in mind that it's your choice if you want to work from observation or if you want to work from a photo reference. But if you do work from a photo reference, you should still set up your own still life setup with real popcorn and then take the photo, so that you're being thoughtful about the setup, the composition, making sure that there are some interesting shadows. So I recommend using a single light source. Now, I was working on this during the day, so I just used the light coming in from the window, which was to the left of me, which was casting some interesting shadows to the right of the popcorn. Now, if you're working on this at night, maybe you don't have a place to set up near a window, you can find any type of lamp that you have at home, or flashlight, or a lantern, anything like that. Here you can see I've got a black table lamp, but any kind of lamp that you can put to the side of your setup to create some interesting shadows would be helpful to create an interesting image, but also having that variety of value from light to dark will make the popcorn look super 3D in your painting. So as you can see, I just set it up very simply. Now, it's your choice whether you want to focus on one kernel of popcorn or if you want to have many kernels of popcorn. That's up to you, but you should consider composition. So, for example, if you're using one kernel of popcorn, you may have to really zoom in on that to fill up some space. Otherwise, you're going to have too much negative space in the composition. So you still want to think about the balance of the positive negative space in your composition. Here you can see I chose to use 5 kernels of popcorn and a couple little popcorn seeds. And you can see here my setup with my paints and brushes on the right, And here you can see I've already done the drawing. Now, if you need help with the drawing part of this, I have a separate demo video that talks about how you approach drawing popcorn. But the main thing to keep in mind is just keep the shapes simple. And that's the same idea we're going to use when we start the paint, right? So the drawing portion is really just to get an idea of the placement of the popcorn in the composition. It gives you a chance to really play around with composition and proportions before you get into adding color. I'm going to use 2 sized brushes here. You can see they are flat brushes. One is a little bit larger, so I can do large areas such as the background. One is a little bit smaller later when I work on detail. I'm going to start by using the larger brush. I do have some solvent to the right of me that I can wet my brush with, and right now I'm just doing a few tests on the background to try to get a match for that background color. Now, I was noticing this is very subtle, very difficult to get a perfect match, but I did notice that the background color was just slightly cooler than the popcorn itself. So that told me that I had to add a cooler color. So I used that purple to mix in with a tiny touch of yellow and lots of white to try to get that cooler background color. So as you can see, I just kind of swatched some things and then I wiped it down once I decided which color to go with. And now I'm just going to cover the whole background with that color that I found. So here we've got the background in with a large brush. Just a thin wash of paint. And now I'm going to approach the cast shadows. Now you don't have to do it in this order, but I do find that getting the background color in first is super helpful when matching the colors and values in the rest of the painting, because that way you're not comparing everything to a stark white background. You have an idea of what you're trying to match your color next to, because colors look different depending on what they're next to. So if you can get that background color in first, that's ideal. And then start looking for some of your darker values. At least that's what I like to do. You don't necessarily have to do it in that order with starting with darker values, but I find that it's helpful for me to get a background color in, and then I look for my darkest values and then kind of move up to medium and then light. But sometimes I jump a little bit back and forth, and that's totally fine. Because the longer you look at your reference and the longer you paint, you're going to see new things. But the main thing to keep in mind for this project, the most helpful thing for painting something complex like popcorn, is working from large shapes down to medium shapes with small shapes last. So I'm, as you can see, really just blocking things in just general areas where I see light and dark, and just trying to match the color and value without worrying about any kind of details. If you want to make this a super detailed painting, the details have to be saved for last. So you work up to it, right? It's kind of like you're setting up the structure of the painting with these building blocks, and then you get a little more specific with each step that you take. So I'm just utilizing that large brush to block in the colors and values here. And I'm just looking back and forth between my reference and my painting. And so I'm doing 2 things. I'm looking at the value, but also looking at the color. Like I said, cast shadows, they've got a tiny bit of purple in them to cool them down and darken them. You will notice that oftentimes in real life, cast shadows have a little touch of color to them. They're very rarely completely neutral. Now, you can see in my reference, they look neutral, but they're not totally gray, right? They have a little bit of a cooler tone when you compare it to the warm tone of the popcorn. So I switched to my smaller brush. I like to work with the flat shape brushes. Now, at the very end of your painting, if you want to do some fine detail work with a small round brush, that's totally fine with me. I stuck to the flat brushes for this one. I kept things pretty structural for my shapes because that's how I like to paint. And I felt like I was able to get a realistic look from making these popcorn kernels look real, but also it still looks like a painting. So I'm not necessarily trying to make it look like a photo, but if I can get the main structure correct, and if I can, in general, get the values and colors matching pretty well, then it's going to translate as what I want it to be. Now here you can see I wasn't quite done, but I was really blocking in those areas. And here I'm more finished with the painting. Now I could consider this being finished. It could go either way. I could finish it here, or I could do, if I really wanted to get super detailed, I could go in with a little bit more with like a small round brush and just detail things out. But I feel like at this point it could be called finished because it's got a good structure. It's got a wide range of values. The value and color match is pretty good. And I think even if you didn't see the reference, you would be able to tell that this is a painting of popcorn, right? I really feel like those complementary colors of using purple in the cool areas helps to pop out the yellow in the subject matter. So I think that worked out really well. I would say when in doubt, it's a little bit better to err on the side of more vibrant color rather than going totally neutral, just because I feel like with students who are new to painting, they tend to use a lot of neutrals just because it feels safe, and because maybe they're looking at something that on a first glance looks neutral, so they think, oh, okay, brown and gray. But neutrals have so many subtleties to them. They can lean towards different colors, right? So like you can see some neutral areas on the popcorn, sort of like a cream color is leaning towards yellow, whereas the neutral colors in the cast shadow in the background are leaning towards purple. So they're still neutral, but there's different neutrals, right? So it really helps the painting to look more realistic. And, because at the end of the day, you are translating something from real life that's 3D onto a 2D surface, but you want it to look 3D on the 2D surface. So sometimes we have to use certain strategies to really make it look 3D. I think the way I set this up with using a light source that was casting some cast shadows was really also helpful for making, the popcorn really look 3D in the painting. So I hope that this demo was helpful. Leave your thoughts down below in the comments. If you have any questions, I am happy to read the comments and give some feedback. This was a quick demo, but once again, if you are struggling with the drawing portion of trying to figure out how to approach these complex shapes, you can head over to my demo video that approaches drawing popcorn. But once you get the composition and proportion set on your canvas, then all you're really thinking about is filling in values and color. You're not going to worry so much about proportions and moving things around and stuff like that because you've already had that step figured out. So this is what I really like to do. I like to take things in steps, especially for students who are new to painting. I think is very helpful to take things one at a time, so you're not being overwhelmed with too much to think about at once. So don't forget, you want to start with large shapes, then break it down to medium shapes, then to small shapes with detail last. Now, I did this whole painting as just one layer of paint. I only used paint and solvent. However, if you are going to use multiple sessions, that's totally fine too. You could let the first layer dry, and then when you come back to it, do another layer on top. With the layers that come after the first, if you feel like the paint is too thin or it's not giving you the right coverage you want, you could start incorporating a tiny bit of linseed oil on your brush when you go into the paint. And once you start using that on those second or third layers of the painting, it's really gonna stick to the surface and help your paint to still feel oily and movable, but without getting too thin. So it will still have a good opaque coverage. So that's my advice on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.